Garcia White is a prisoner in Texas. If the state has its way, he'll be dead within the hour. This is Execution Watch. Huntsville, Texas, death penalty capital of the Western world, where prison staff is preparing to put White to death by injecting him with a deliberate drug overdose. During the next hour, KPFT's Execution Watch will air live coverage of the killing in Texas, the state that carries out 1/3 of all U.S. executions. Execution Watch host Marlo Blue, criminal defense attorneys Merrill Pontier and Monique Sparks, Huntsville reporter outside the death house Linda Snyder, general reporter Clinton Young, and featured interview guest Oklahoma State Representative Justin Humphrey, the former corrections officer, talks about the devastating impact on guards assigned to help with executions. The Execution Watch for Garcia White begins.
One's too many, will 1,000 be enough? One life.
Tonight, the state of Texas ushers Garcia Glenn White into the death chamber. To our listeners around the world, thank you for joining us on this Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024 edition of Execution Watch. I'm Marlo Blue. If you're tuning in for Thanks on KPFT Houston, they will be back next week in their regularly scheduled 6 o'clock time slot. Execution Watch is produced by a dedicated staff of volunteers. We report live each and every time an execution is scheduled in the state of Texas. The live video stream of this show can be found right now on our Execution Watch Facebook page and simulcast on houstonmediasource.org. During tonight's broadcast, we will be giving you details about the case, including background surrounding the trial and conviction. We will have expert legal analysis, as well as live reports from Huntsville and breaking news regarding any last-minute judicial action. There will be a featured interview with Representative Justin Humphrey of Oklahoma, a former correctional officer and now Oklahoma lawmaker. And we will hear from our newest reporter, who himself is a former death row inmate, Clinton Young. Tonight, the state of Texas will execute Garcia Glenn White. Now age 61, White was convicted and sentenced to death for the 1989 stabbing deaths of 16-year-old twin sisters Burnett and Annette Edwards in their Houston, Texas home. According to an article in USA Today, judges and courts have rejected all of White's recent appeals, and the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles declined to hold a clemency hearing for him, clearing the way for Texas to execute him Tuesday without intervention from a court or Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott. White's lawyers have asked the Supreme Court to stop his execution after the lower courts rejected his petitions for a stay. As of 5:54 today Central Time, the Supreme Court has denied all appeals. His lawyers argued that Texas's top criminal appeals court has refused to accept medical evidence and strong factual backing showing White intellectually disabled. If the execution proceeds, he will be the 4th person by the state of Texas in 2024 and the 6th execution in a 10-day period throughout the United States. Since the reinstatement by the U.S. Supreme Court of Capital Punishment in 1976, 1,600 have been put to death. Joining us first tonight is our reporter stationed just outside of the death house in Huntsville, Texas, activist Linda Snyder. Hello, Linda. Thank you for joining us. Any news? As we try to connect with Linda, let's continue to say who we were going to be seeing this evening. Of course, on our call tonight will be Clinton Young, Representative Justin Humphreys, Merrill Pontier, and Monique. Thank you very much for joining us, all of you. I do appreciate it. Linda, have you got your audio worked out today? All right. As we continue on, let's start a little bit about the case. I know she's trying to get into position. Let's turn to our panel now and get some quick feedback on some of the different aspects of this case. Tonight's panel discussion is led by criminal defense attorney Merle Pontier, and we welcome again our very special guest, Houston criminal defense attorney Monique Sparks. Also joining us is Execution Watch reporter Clinton Young, a former death row inmate. Merle, explain the case to us if you can.
Yeah, sure. So this is a very old case. Mr. White was convicted for a 1989 triple murder in Houston. Twin daughters, 16 years old, and their mother were killed. Mr. White was convicted of that in 7 years later, 1996. And during punishment phase, the state presented evidence that White may have committed other murders, although he wasn't convicted for those murders. So in total, they presented evidence he may have committed 5. So he got the death penalty in 96. He filed a first writ application. I couldn't find documents related to that, so I don't know what exactly was filed. I found his second and third writ application, state habeas application, which he filed in 2009 and 2015. In the first one, he raised 5 claims, including one pertaining to DNA testing, and also another one saying that he was incompetent to waive his Miranda rights whenever he gave his confession. The CCA actually dismissed that application as an abuse of the writ. He filed a second subsequent application, 2015. He said that if certain newly discovered scientific evidence had been available at trial, that would have likely changed the jury's answers to the special issues. He said the new scientific evidence was that a scientific paper that was written in 2009 indicated that a regular user of cocaine has a high probability of developing or experiencing psychotic symptoms. And he said this new information would have really changed the sentence in his case. And he said that would have entitled him to relief. But the CCA said, no, it does not, because that evidence would have only changed punishment. And so that does not show that he would not have been convicted. So they dismissed that application too. He filed a federal habeas petition with many claims. The first 5 all go towards innocence, either for capital murder or the death penalty, saying he wasn't deserving of the death penalty. He said that there was new DNA testing that would have showed an unidentified third party at the crime scene. He also says that his conduct in prison demonstrates that the jury was wrong about future dangerousness, which is, of course, something that a lot of people have said. You know, if people stay on death row for such a long time period, 10, 20, sometimes 30 years or longer, those people are not the same people as when they were convicted, or the dangerousness may have changed. So that's a criticism that we hear a lot about, the future dangerousness prong that the jury has to answer. So another claim he raised was that new evidence on the effects of cocaine on the brain would lead a jury to find that he did not act deliberately. He said he used cocaine when these murders happened, and so that could not have created intent. He also said that new research on the effects of cocaine would have led to an answer of yes on the mitigation special issue. He filed more claims in relation to future dangerousness and mitigation, and he filed a Penrick claim saying that the jury could not consider all this mitigating evidence in his case. All the claims were denied, and his petition was dismissed. He went to the Supreme Court when he got this execution date. His current counsel, Mr. McCann, filed a brief saying that the CCA refused to accept medical evidence showing that Mr. White is intellectually disabled. Interestingly, there was a second attorney who filed a brief at the Supreme Court on Mr. White's behalf, and asked for a stay of execution. And in that brief, he stated that Mr. White is being penalized because Mr. McCann had not previously filed a timely appeal over the intellectual disability issue. The EDPA says you have to raise those issues within 1 year. And this attorney says McCann didn't do that. It was the attorney from the Austin Chew. And so basically, because the attorney didn't raise the claim, the client is being penalized because he's now barred from raising that claim. And so this attorney says, we shouldn't penalize the client for that. He should still be able to make the Atkins claim, is Atkins versus Virginia, is the intellectual disability claim. And I mean, both briefs were denied by the Supreme Court today.
I want to bring in Monique Sparks. It's very, very interesting to me that, of course, Mr. White was heavily using drugs during the period of these murders. Should that have been more? Should that have made more of a difference in the sentencing phase?
Absolutely. Well, voluntary intoxication is not a defense, but however, it can, if it's to the level of insanity, or it can be a factor that can be taken in consideration. So it's involuntary intoxication alone is not, well, voluntary intoxication is not a defense, but if it raised to the level to create some type of hallucinant state or created a level of insanity, then absolutely that would have been, telling.
And of course, there was this statement from Josh Reese. He's the chief of the Post-Conviction Writs Division with the Harris County District Attorney's Office here in Houston, Texas. He gave this quote to USA Today. Garcia Glenn White committed 5 murders in 3 different transactions, and 2 of his victims were teenage girls. This is the type of case that the death penalty was intended for. There are no celebrities calling for a halt to this execution. There's no large protests for a man that is linked to these 5 deaths. But is the man Texas is executing tonight the same man who committed this crime? Talk a little bit about intellectual disabilities. What kind of discretion does the state of Texas have in these kinds of cases? And I'm throwing that open to either one of you, Monique or to Meryl.
Well, there's clear evidence, and I'll let Meryl get into it a bit more, but I mean, there's clear evidence about the brain and when it's fully formed, and even about aggressiveness and when, that tremendously drops in regards to testosterone and things of that nature. So clearly, whether what his intent was at the time and what factor these mental, his mental abilities or the cocaine or all the things, I'm not sure of what other mental deficits that he had. Absolutely, they play a role. And 30 years later, clearly he's not who he was at the time. And is this somebody, if he did do this, is he the person he is now? And does he, at this point, deserve the death penalty? And I would argue no. I would argue no. After 30 years of incarceration with those issues, that he does not, the death penalty. I don't believe anybody should get the death penalty, but especially after 30 years, no.
Right. Let me break away for just a moment and let's go back to our reporter outside of the death house in Huntsville, Texas, activist Linda Snyder. Hello, Linda. Can you hear us today?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Is there any news?
No, nothing. No one's crossed yet.
What's the atmosphere out like tonight?
There's quite a few people here. We have a lot of abolitionists for sure. And it's quiet though. We have one news media here.
Do we know who is standing witness for Mr. White?
I believe his mother and his brother are. I don't know who else. I saw them today at visit, and I think they were going to be with him.
Just for those who are listening around the world, and we do welcome all of them, can you please explain what signal you are looking for that will let us know that the execution is about to begin?
We'll know when they cross over, that means it's fixing to take place. So then probably about 10 minutes after they cross the road, it will start going.
And you're actually standing there on the grounds of the death house there.
Yes.
Oh, I see. All right. And are there any other signals that you're going to be looking for tonight?
No, basically that's the only thing, and then waiting until they come back out across the road. When they come back out, that means it's over.
Linda, you said that you saw him briefly at visitation today. Can you tell us anything about Mr. White?
I don't really know him, but he was, from what I understand from all the guys that knew him, they said he was a wonderful friend, and he broke a lot of people's hearts when he walked out the gate today of the prison. He really did, because they know that he won't be coming back.
Right. Well, thank you, Linda. Please let us know.
I will let you know
when there's any movement. And Linda Snyder is reporting to us tonight from outside the walls unit in Huntsville, Texas, known as the Death House. We will be checking back in with her a little bit later. Again, just in case you were listening on KPFT 90.1 FM, this is a special edition of Execution Watch as we wait to find out if the execution of Garcia Glenn White has started. Let's get back to our discussion with Merle Pontier, with Monique Sparks, and let's bring in Clinton Young. Clinton, can you tell me, how does prison change you, especially being on death row?
Okay, in a minute.
I mean, I don't know if we got enough time going all that. But I mean, I guess, and I don't even know how to keep that simple. Same way war changes people, it affects you. I mean, it becomes your existence. I mean, some people get institutionalized, some people it breaks them, some people it makes them worse. But a lot of people, it changes them for the better, right? More so when they have a desire to change. I knew Garcia White. We called him Big White. And the only disciplinary case I ever, in fact, I want to go out on a limb and say the only disciplinary case he caught the whole time he was on death row was, there was a Major McMullen who went to another unit. There was a big scandal because he was telling officers to write 2 cases a day. And they rolled Big White up for having an extra roll of toilet paper. And him and like 2 other guys, they needed somebody to go to the disciplinary level. They actually put him on disciplinary level for an extra roll of toilet paper. And so that was the only disciplinary case and he had ever gotten, right? I mean, like they said, everybody liked him. I don't know how he was in the free world. I wasn't out there with him. I know how he was in prison. And he was a model prisoner. I mean, just because he was on death row and in solitary confinement certainly did not mean that he did not have an opportunity to cause trouble, assault staff, etc. I mean, there's been an officer taken hostage before on Plunsk Unit 12 building. There's been officers assaulted in various ways. So, I mean, a person has the means and opportunity to do things. He chose not to. He chose to live his life the right way, right? And so at this point, especially after 30 years, I mean, like, it's lost its deterrent, so-called deterrent factor, right? I mean, it's just, there's plenty of people in population with capital murder. On Plunsk unit and general population, there was a guy that had 5 capital murder 5 life sentences for 5 counts of capital murder. But because of the county he was from, he got life. Garcia White, unfortunately, had the bad luck and You know, I mean, beyond the natures of the offense and et cetera, just sticking to the pure politics of the death penalty. You know, he was under the old Harris County, and if he'd have been somewhere else, he wouldn't have got the death penalty, which is why it's arbitrary. You know, one county you get it, another county they'll give you life. It all comes down to the politics of the prosecutors, and you know, this is just a prime example of why the death penalty makes no sense.
It's a little early for us, and we are still, of course, waiting to find out from our reporter Linda Snyder if the execution has begun. But joining us today is Representative Justin Humphrey, who serves in the Oklahoma House of Representatives for District 19, which includes Atoka, Bryan, Choctaw, and Pushmataha counties in southeast Oklahoma. I'd like to bring him in now.
Spell it.
Humphrey currently serves as the chair of the House Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee and serves on the Agricultural and Rural Development and Public Safety Committees, as well as the Appropriations and Budget Subcommittee for Public Safety, among his other duties. Prior to serving the state of Oklahoma as a representative, Mr. Humphrey was a private business owner after retiring from the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, where he served for 20 years. Welcome, Representative Humphrey.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, you know, just this last week, the United States reached the milestone of executing 1,600 prisoners since the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. That's including 600 in the state of Texas and 126 in Oklahoma. As a former correctional officer yourself and a trainer of correctional officers, you've been outspoken about the emotional toll executions take on those who participate. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and how many people are involved in executions?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of people involved because normally you have to have security on those. You have to have a team that trains constantly for that. You know, they have to go in and do mock trainings. And so, again, it's just a massive process, as we talked about. As a correctional officer, you get to know these people, you get to work around these people. When you're assigned to that unit, you know, if you're working there 20 years and that guy's been there 20 years, and let's say that, you know that he killed 5 people, and, you know, you understand that he's going to be executed. But again, if they treat you good and you treat them good and you spend 20 years, 8 hours a day with people, you know what I'm saying? It does. I've talked to guys that had to walk somebody down to the death row, and, you know, they come in some snot-nosed 17, 18. Well, they had to be 18 generally, usually, but they come in at 18, and again, they're not the same person that 20 years later, and you've gotten to know them, and then you've got to walk them down there and, you know, put them on that gurney. You know, I mean, it is a trying experience. And so, you know, I remember the first time that I went in death row and heard one of the people who had to walk somebody down there and put them on, and it didn't, you know, I've always been a person that was supporting the death penalty, but it changed my mind about the death penalty. It brought a whole new attention to, hey, these are people, and these are people who have a relationship having to walk them down there. And it does create a hardship on those officers. And so one of the things that I've said is we shouldn't have these back to back. You know, there should be a 90-day time period between at least each execution per state, and to give those officers the time to you know, get over that, to decompress off of that. And again, one of the big things that I've advocated is we are now seeing a lot of prosecutable evidence that was falsified, destroyed, lied about. And so again, this has really caused me to get involved and be very outspoken that before we can execute somebody, we have to have a process that we believe in. We have to have a process that we know is true. And some of our appellate courts, I've seen evidence that went before appellate court that how in the world could you say that that person need to be executed when we have evidence that the prosecutors destroyed 10 key pieces of evidence. A guy named Richard Glossop right now is in the U.S. Supreme Court. His case will go October the 9th. We have evidence to show that the prosecutors intentionally destroyed 10 key pieces of evidence, that they sent a note to have their key witness lie, asked him to change his sworn testimony to help their case, and told him what to say, and they withheld evidence, and yet the appellate court in Oklahoma said go ahead and execute that guy. When we have a process like that, we all need to step back and say, it's time we look at that process. And so I'm having a hearing actually this Thursday to actually do that, to look at our process and say, here in Oklahoma, do we actually have a fair and impartial process that actually looks to see, are these people guilty, truly guilty, before they are executed?
I just want to interrupt for just a moment to let you know that we have heard from Linda Snyder. The execution has begun, absolutely. So let's carry on with what we're continuing to talk about. Is there any special training for those who assisting in executions, both before and after the event, JJ?
There is a lot of training that they have to go to. Like I say, a lot of these people will have mock trials, and they'll have to go through how to conduct yourself and what to prepare for, and what if this happens, and they run through different scenarios. And so there is a lot of training. I don't know of anything that do they have any religious or psychological people that they can go to and talk to afterwards to talk about their issues with this. And again, I listen to people all the time say, well, I could pull the lever, or I could do that. Well, if you can, if you're wanting to do that, there's something wrong with you, because for me, I don't want to take a person's life if I don't have to. I understand that we have a death penalty. I understand we have to carry it out, and that's a duty. But you don't do it with, I'm looking forward to it. You do it with regret. You do it because it's a duty. You do it because you have to. And again, that's the things when you're doing that. Do we have those people to talk to? And when you're doing them back to back, we've seen them there in Oklahoma. I mean, some of these cases were back to back to back to back, and that's no good. We're shorthanded in Oklahoma enough, and to put this kind of duty on them and to do them back to back is asking too much of those officers. And so again, I've advocated that we have those separations. I've also advocated that we make sure that we get them right, and I've seen several, and again, I will tell you that until I was a legislator, I refused to look at several of these cases, and got involved in one case and then got involved in another case. And I can tell you that I've had my eyes open to that. I thought we had a great system, and that, we have a system of appellate courts and Supreme Courts. And so there's no way some of these issues could slip through, that they've had an opportunity, they've looked at 100 times. Now that I've been involved in it, guess what? I know that we have prosecutors that become judges, that become appellate judges, and it's ingrained into them that once the case is tried, it's tried, don't look at it again. And so again, that's the kind of attitude that we have there in Oklahoma because of the way our systems are structured. And again, we have to look at, are we actually looking at when we have new evidence that's overwhelming evidence that should be before our courts, that we should be able to look at that. We have a duty to look at it. We have to make sure that if we're going to execute people, get it right. And if we can't get it right, then don't do it at all. And that's where I'm at. And again, I'm for, we have to get it right. And so anybody that would disagree with that, I say, I'm worried about them. You know what I'm saying? I think most people I talk to, even that are strong supporters of the death penalty, I think everybody I've talked to wants to make sure we get it right.
Well, because it's a final solution for sure.
Oh,
Eh,
absolutely. I mean, this is murder. I mean, we're taking a life for a life, and we better make sure that we're taking the right life. And again, when you look at the number of people who've come off of death row that were found to be innocent, and I can name you a couple there, we've had some in Oklahoma.
Right.
I think that I actually got to participate in writing a little bit for the brief that's going in front of the Supreme Court on October the 9th next week. And I can tell you that that guy right there did not receive a fair trial, didn't even receive what would remotely be a fair trial, that the prosecutors need to take his place. The prosecutors ought to be put in where he was at. This guy's been on the gurney 3 times. He's been seconds away from death. He's had his last meal 9 times. And I believe that if the U.S. Supreme Court is just, they will reorder a new trial. And I believe that if he gets a new trial, I don't think they could convict him of jaywalking. I think he'll go free. And again, that needs to be a wake-up call for all of us.
JJ, you said that your experiences have altered your opinion on the death penalty. Let me ask you another question. How does this experience make you feel on a human level?
Well, again, when we're looking at, do I think somebody that took somebody else's life, 3 people's life, 5 people's life, but a while ago, Clinton said this, and he got into the fact that 30 years later, that we're not really seeing a deterrent. I asked a group of young people I was working with, we executed a guy named Stafford, and he'd went into a restaurant and put everybody back in there in the cooler. And I forget how many, 10 or 12 people he had executed, and he'd killed a couple other people. I mean, Stafford was a mean guy. If there's anybody ever deserved the death penalty, Stafford was the guy. But Roger Dale Stafford, I think was that guy's name. We're going back several years. But when they went and they got ready to execute him, I asked a group of young people that I was working with, I said, how many of y'all know who Roger Dale Stafford was? None of them knew Roger Dale Stafford. I said, well, what do you think that, told them the case. They had no idea. So again, are we using it as a deterrent? If we are, 30 years down the road, that's probably not being too effective as a deterrent. Again, if you say, hey, he deserves to die because he took these lives, I would tend to agree with that. But again, if we're going to use it, we have to make sure that we have a process where we're absolutely certain that this guy did take those lives. And again, I think that you have to consider a mental capacity and mental awareness. And you get into some pretty complicated things. It's not an easy thing to do. But if we're going to have the death penalty, I want to make sure that we definitely carry it out and that people can get that evidence in front of, and that we don't have courts that are trying to destroy evidence, trying to have witnesses lie, and trying to make the outcome. These prosecutors took an oath to justice, and that's not justice. That's not justice as I know it. And I'm a law enforcement officer. I'm not just, I've been a correctional officer. I'm a law enforcement officer. And again, I took an oath to justice, and that ain't justice the way I know it.
Let's bring in our panel at this point in time. Clinton Young, if you would, please join into the conversation. You were having a great conversation that I had to stop with JJ Humphrey a little while early. I hope to get some of that back. And of course, to our legal analysts, to Meryl and to Monique. Clinton, start the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he hit the nail on the head. And we, our previous discussion, we covered things like this and about prosecutors and how they do these things, withhold evidence, and not held accountable. Additionally, there's defense attorneys who knowingly and intentionally don't do, uphold their oath. And, one of the things that I would like, as somebody that's gone through this situation, for lawmakers to pass is some type of law that holds these prosecutors accountable. Because, you know, as you said, they withheld evidence and had a witness lie. Okay, if you have a witness lie in a death penalty trial, state of Texas, it's aggravated perjury. That's a felony. There was a prosecutor in my case, had witnesses lie, got on the stand during pretrial, said there was no plea bargains, had them testify falsely at a writ hearing, got up there and said there was no plea bargains. The court found that he was lying and that he had the witness lie. So he committed perjury twice and then sponsored aggravated perjury. And so he still has his law license. All right, he's no longer a prosecutor because there was just a swing in politics back then in 2008, because he was still labeled as a Texas Democrat, and there was that Republican sweep in Texas when the old, Texas Democrats, Southern Democrats, etc. A lot of them were voted out of office, and so now he's a defense attorney. Well, there was no consequences.
And Clinton, I agree with that. In fact, I'm sitting here listening to you thinking I may even file something in Oklahoma saying that if you do that, a prosecutorial, felony or something, if you intentionally lie, misrepresent, that you should be prosecuted. But I will tell you what got me in my case, and you said this, Clinton, a while ago, in this Richard Glossop case, it really just woke my self up, or my opinion, changed my opinion in that case. It wasn't the prosecutors. I didn't find that out till later, but when I heard who represented him, because of my experience in doing 30 something years as a law enforcement officer, I knew when I heard who represented him, I knew the guy didn't get proper representation. I would have never looked at the case if I had not heard that one lawyer. And because of that one lawyer, I started looking, and then I started going, my gosh, how'd they convict this guy? My gosh, is this what you use? And just saw, I think there was somebody else involved in it. I think they've missed the whole deal. They messed the whole case up, but they intentionally lied, destroyed evidence. And again, they should be prosecuted. But we also have to talk about the level. We need attorneys in these death penalty cases because they're so complicated. And when they're going to seek the death penalty, we should have people that understand the system, not new people, not people that are very poor attorneys. These should be good attorneys that would represent them, because these are complicated cases.
Well,
and a lot of it comes, excuse me, real quick. A lot of it comes down to, like, in Texas, we have a bifurcated appellate system. We have the Supreme Court and the Court of Criminal Appeals. Court of Criminal Appeals deals with criminal. Supreme Court deals with civil.
Right.
And so, when I spoke before the House of Representatives, one of the things I told them, I said, they passed a law. The legislature passes a law because they don't want people languishing on death row for 30 years. Okay, they want to make sure the guilty, quote unquote, pay. But in doing so, it's enabled the courts to interpret it in the most extreme manner possible. And so, no matter what, the court isn't supposed to create law. They're supposed to make sure that the law that y'all pass, because y'all are the lawmakers, not the courts. And so they're supposed to make sure that all that's in line with the Constitution. And so beyond holding prosecutors accountable, I mean, there's got to be some type of medium that can be reached to say, okay, look, we're not going to make, the guilty go free here, but we need some type of protection in place, either a special appeal or something, that if somebody has a legitimate innocence claim, like me and you had talked about the guy that had self-defense, what you believed was a self-defense case, situations like that. Yeah, situations like that where the current prosecutor and the current judge, the original trial judge, are not involved in the proceedings. So he has a fair, honest look where there's nobody saying, hey, well, I was a judge in the office at the time. I was a prosecutor, assistant district attorney, and now I'm a judge. you know, I can't go against my old boss, or I was involved in the case and I don't want it to, look bad on me. So he just goes along with the prosecutor. And I mean, there just has to be something.
Well, and just like in that case, they withheld a tape of the person that was the victim that died. Actually, was the person trying to kill this guy. This guy just defended himself, but the guy that was the victim, his own girlfriend said, "Hey, the victim's the one had the gun. The victim was trying to hit the guy with the pipe and stuff him in a cage, and said that he would have killed him if he would have put him in there." They withhold that tape, and that tape. I mean, when you view that tape, I mean, most people would say that's absolutely self-defense. And if it's self-defense, the guy should have walked. How in the world could they even get a death penalty case out of that, out of a self-defense case? Because he obviously didn't bring the gun. He didn't intend to kill anybody. So how did they even get it to a death penalty case anyways? And then the Brady Act, which is supposed to protect us from them withholding evidence. But guess what? When you catch them, we caught case after case, and they do absolutely nothing. So we got to put teeth in there.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, right? And it's often, when it comes to self-defense, this is what frustrates a lot of people, man, especially minorities and etc. I know a guy on death row. He has a self-defense case. Now, was he living an honest life at the time? No. Okay.
Well, neither was this guy, but that don't mean you ain't got a right to defend you. I don't care what you're doing. If I'm doing drugs and you try to kill me, I still got a right to defend myself,
Well, that's how this situation was. And the prosecutors, I guess, deemed because, his lifestyle and etc., that he wasn't entitled to the same, self-defense, because he was from the hood versus somebody living in Woodlands, the wealthy suburbs, and or like the case of Joe Horn. He shot 2 people for stealing TVs from his neighbor. And so, when people see that, that's why there becomes a rage in different communities, because the law is not equally applied, and like you said, there has to be something. There has to be some teeth in there. There has to be a consequence for the people that do these things. I mean, not only just for the death penalty, but people serving life sentences and etc. But in the death penalty, it's more extreme because, once that clock runs out, that clock runs out.
Right, absolutely. Let's bring the lawyers back in this, if we can. I don't understand it. I mean, doesn't a lawyer have a basic duty to be truthful?
Well, prosecutors have what's called prosecutorial immunity. So basically, everything they do as a prosecutor, they're immune from, being sued for what they've done, even if they withheld evidence, if they make witnesses lie on the stand, if they commit any sort of misconduct, they're shielded, they're protected from being sued. And there's really only one very narrow exception to that, and that is they can still be sued for actions that are not related to their job as a prosecutor. But I was just looking at a report
Some for
that was
years,
published.
some for decades, some for many decades.
Go ahead, Meryl.
Go on, Meryl.
I was just looking at a report that was published by the Death Penalty Information Center, and they've done an analysis of all the wrongful convictions where people were sent to death row and the exonerations. And they said that in about 70% of those cases, prosecutorial misconduct or government misconduct was one of the reasons that that person was wrongfully convicted. And in those cases, it also took longer for that person to be exonerated because the government will fight it harder than, for example, when you say ineffective assisted counsel or any other claim. So it's like the number one reason that people are wrongfully convicted and sent to death row, but it takes longer to exonerate those people. And then once a person is exonerated, there's really basically no no recourse to take when it comes to these prosecutors. They can't really be held accountable.
Well, and one of the
And
things
what's
that I don't know about in your state, but in our state, we see so many prosecutors move up, become judges, move up to take, the appellate judges, which where all this is going, and they all know each other, and they all kind of feel like they have to back each other, or they just don't want to hear that they don't want to open that door to say we could be wrong, our process could be wrong. So it's almost like they all just have this big cabal that they're not going to let that be heard. And so that's what we're up against fighting here that I want to try to change. And again, we should never, transparency is the best. We should never be afraid of looking at a case and getting the facts. That's what we want. And again, holding these people accountable.
It
But
does. It does seem to be a definite conspiracy, as the case may be. Let's talk a little bit about Judge Gary Lumpkin. He was a former prosecutor and currently on the bench of Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. He's been very critical, as you said, of course, JJ, that there were a lot of back-to-back executions, and he has been very critical about the fact that people working in the correctional industry are complaining, saying that
Yes.
they are having trauma after these incidences that has been affecting them. They're having post-traumatic stress from being involved in these executions, and this gentleman says that he criticized the correctional officers for not manning up and doing their jobs. How is that allowed to exist? What do you
Well,
think about that?
Well, first of all, I think it shows his ignorance is one, is what I would say. And again, he has, I would almost guarantee you that that judge has never went down there and walked those cells, walked in those places, had to work the job that they're working. A lot of these officers, we're shorthanded here in Oklahoma. A lot of these officers are working overtime, massive overtime. They're working 5, 6 days a week. They're working 12 to maybe more hours, and then to put this on top of that and have to the pressures. And it's not just that they're seeing somebody executed or they're taking a part in taking a life, but the pressure to get that right. Everybody's watching this, the world is watching it, and your job is going to be scrutinized every different way, and anything that goes wrong is going to be put on you. That's a lot of pressure for that officer to have to bear, and for that judge to say that just so shows his ignorance, and that's the level of ignorance that we're having to fight. And so again, I don't care where you're at on the subject of whether you're for the death penalty or whether you're against the death penalty, but we all should be able to recognize the stress level, the pressure that goes on these officers, the entire staff. And again, we've got to recognize that, these guys may have committed a heinous act, but they've got families, they've got mothers, they got brothers, they got sisters. Again, they've got friends in the penitentiary. And again, you got to recognize that a lot of people are going to be hurt out of this situation, taking this guy and executing him. And so to make those kind of statements about that kind of act and about those kind of duties, I mean, the highest level of duties that we can have for correctional officers, correctional employees is this right here. And to make those kind of statements just shows that he has no even understanding of what kind of duties they have. And again, it shows me he's not taking his job seriously.
Right. At the moment, let's go
Yeah.
back to Linda Snyder, who is in Huntsville outside of the death house. Linda, if we can bring you back up, tell us, please, if there's anything going on. And again, I'm sorry, we have lost her. We will come back with her in just a moment. Sorry to interrupt the discussion, gentlemen.
You go by JJ? Or
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Humphrey. Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Nah, just JJ.
Okay, yes, sir. As going back to our conversation, I mean, to me, I'm glad that that correctional officers I'm not saying I want anybody to have to suffer pain, etc. But it's reassuring to me from a human perspective that executions impact them. You know, if it didn't, the taking of a life wasn't something that, you know, people took serious, that gets kind of sociopathic, right?
It really is, Clinton. Clinton, I think you'll understand this probably better than anybody. When you work in there, you're always going to have bad officers. You're going to have bad inmates. You're going to have polar opposites. You're going to have those people on both sides. But the majority of us that work in there, man, I got to know a lot of great inmates, you know, that were there. Bad stuff, bad upbringings, bad whatever caused it, drugs. There was a lot of things, environmental issues that could factor in. I think lots of factors end up having an effect on what we do and make decisions. But I got along with a lot of people, and today I help people who get out of the penitentiary. I was a drug court administrator. Some of my best friends were people that I supervised and worked with. I mean, I love them to death. I go to church with them, the whole 9 yards. And so again, you can get along. You got a job to do. If you're an inmate, you got a job as an inmate. I got a job as correctional officer. But again, there's those on both sides that'll never reach that. But the majority of people get along. And so when you have an 8-hour relationship, you get to know them probably better than most people. I mean, think about your friends out here outside on the outside world. How many friends do you spend 8 hours a day with? How many friends?
Right.
You know
right.
what I'm saying? So that's what people don't understand. You do build a relationship with these people on both sides. You know, I know inmates, how do you get along with that officer? But they do get along with that officer. And I've had inmates, I've been in a fight, and I will tell you, I've been in some bad situations if an inmate wouldn't have stepped in and really helped me out and got me out of that. So again, and I do the same for them. And so again, it does, there's relationships that are built there. And again, when you're seeing somebody executed like that, you can't just turn that switch off and say, okay, today we're going to execute you,
Gentlemen, I'd like to bring in Linda Snyder for one last moment. If we can get Linda back in. Mark, can you connect us, please?
Up to her, I asked her.
All right. So we are continuing on with our conversations. Ladies, is there anything else that you would like to add to what we've been talking about? Meryl? Monique?
I think they're both off, right? I think
they got me and you talk.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. There's Linda back.
Linda, is there anything else going on over there that you can tell us about? Linda.
You got to unmute, Linda.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yes. No one's come across.
And the witnesses did cross approximately 6 p.m., is that correct?
Yes, they did, right before I drove up.
We had a bit of problems last week with Travis Mullis. Could you please tell us what happened to delay the execution last week?
They couldn't find a vein, so they ended up having to go through his foot. And that's when it started.
There we go. Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you for being out there. We appreciate it. And we are about to sort of wrap up here for Execution Watch. Of course, we are still waiting to hear what's going on in Huntsville. It takes a while sometimes for us to get all of the information, but we know that all of our listeners are interested in hearing.
I do want to say, if people will check us out on oklahomahouse.com, we're going to be having a hearing Thursday, 9 o'clock. If people want to tune in, that'll be an all-day hearing, felony murder, where we're having these types of discussions and having lawyers come in and tell what are the problems, the Brady, the issues over Brady, the issues over how the structure of the court is. I think Texas and Oklahoma are similarly structured. So You know what
Yes,
I'm
sir.
saying? Should be a conversation pretty close to Texas. I'd say Oklahoma and Texas are structured similar and do probably more executions than anywhere else.
I think
Yeah, especially when it comes
we're
to the
right
death
up
penalty.
there. We
When it
truly
comes to the
are.
death penalty, they are.
I agree, Clint.
You
So,
know, real
gentlemen,
quick. Let me say something real quick, please, Marlon. I'll make it fast. You know, you're on these committees, but you also have this real life experience, and it just brought something to my mind that, like, you know, I wish all the politicians, like, if you sit on a correctional committee, et cetera, criminal jurisprudence, that there should be some type of experience that qualifies you to sit on that committee, because people sit on correctional committees that never worked in the penitentiary. I think if people
thank
actually
you,
had these
Clinton.
real life
I
experiences,
agree with you
you know,
100%, but we do need to close at this point in time.
10,000%, Clint.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We do appreciate it. I'd also like our listeners to know that we've had a passing of the Execution Watch family. Mike Gillespie, who has been with Execution Watch for very many years and back since the days of Ray Hill, passed away this summer. And we do thank him and his family for all of what he's done. Thanks to everyone. It bringing to a close this edition of Execution Watch. Our next scheduled broadcast date is Tuesday, October the 17th, 2024, as Texas prepares to send Robert Robertson III into the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. I'd like to thank everyone, including our very special guest, Justin J.J. Humphrey. Our thanks again to the entire Execution Watch crew, Monique Sparks, Meryl Pontier, Linda Snyder, and Clinton Young, video director Mark Pirtle, Otis McClay, Howard Reynolds, Mel Peterson, Zara Sheridan, Elizabeth Stein. Thank you so very much for everyone's. We appreciate what you have done. Up next, if you're listening on 90.1 FM, stay tuned for Jazz in All Its Colors with Sinbad. This has been a special edition of Execution Watch. I'm Marlo Blue. Good night.